Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. Most of the ways that people talk about economics is wrong. Economics is not an incentive system. It's an information system. Free enterprise is driven by the creativity of the human mind, and material resources are essentially infinite. They are not scarce. Karl Marx and now the cultural Marxists are dead wrong. Economics is not a zero-sum game, class struggle for power. Instead, what governs human growth is human creativity. Innovation and growth are capitalism's infinite promise, and it is humanity's best path of escape from stagnation and tyranny. Well, with that open, I don't know where we go from here. There's all this good news to talk about. The gist of that, I won't give it. I think I borrowed most of it from my guest, George Gilder, who is one of the great American heroes and thinkers. I've been reading George. I won't tell you how many decades I've been reading you, and now we're lucky enough to have him back. I guess, George, you were like our fifth or sixth guest on this show.
Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. An honor.
Welcome back. And, of course, everybody...
Your audience was smaller then, though. I'm always somewhat skeptical about being an early guest.
We should be. But you're in the open, and everybody always says to me, isn't that George Gilder? Why don't we get him back?
That's why there's so many viewers now, George. Come on.
Anyway, George is one of America's leading thinkers and author of many books I think most of you should have heard about and should have read: Wealth and Poverty, Knowledge and Power, The Scandal of Money, and Life After Google. And now he's written, I think, a really defining book, Life After Capitalism, which is, and I touched on it in the opening, the meaning of wealth, the future of the economy, and the time theory of money. And joining me in this adventure is John Tamny, who's been back here. How many times we done this together? 7 or 8 times?
More than I've got fingers.
Anyway, John's joining me as co-host this time. He's the editor of Real Clear Markets, and most recently he's the founder of Parkview Institute, which is going to be dedicated to, John?
These kinds of ideas, explaining how the economy works through day-to-day
And then
information. Very controversial stuff.
Well, in this day and age it is.
This day and age.
Of gloom.
Yes.
Anyway, he's also recently published The Money Confusion, How Illiteracy About Currencies and Inflation Sets the Stage for a Crypto Revolution. George, welcome. John.
Well,
Good.
great to be here.
So we're there's so many places to go with this. The information theory of economics.
Yeah. Well, information theory is really the foundation of our global economy, and it applies from computer science to communications, all our internet developments. It applies to biotech, where codes from DNA program RNA to program ribosomes to produce proteins. I mean, information theory is really the foundation of our modern era. And it's there, and what I do in this book is to extend it to economics. And it resolves a lot of key problems of economics. Some of its findings are enormously favorable, that capitalists around the world have been performing far better, I mean, up to 1,000-fold better than all the economic statisticians imagine. And our GNP economists calculate. And it is a basic science of our era that applies to our economy and corrects most of the errors that are pervasive daily in your newspapers as you read about inflation as a natural phenomenon and you read about money as a sovereign tool or a magic wand for central bankers. It's a new theory of economics, but it derives from John von Neumann, Oscar Morgenstern, a great figure in the past, who collaborated with John von Neumann in developing game theory, also wrote a pioneering book called On the Inaccuracy of Economic Observations. If you really read that book carefully, and he's one of the great geniuses of our era, you discover that almost all the economic statistics you see in the newspapers are just plain unfounded. They're just projections, arbitrary, subjective views. They're self-interested inventions, and information theory puts it aright. And that's the contribution of this book.
Well, go ahead, John.
You know, I think it's important to stress that von Neumann, probably one of the smartest people who ever lived, your book is so much more than that in that you bring these theories down to a typical person. And one of the things that I pointed out in my review is that you make the point that when you go pump gas, which people need to know this, you are not pumping gasoline into your car, you're pumping knowledge. Mm-hmm. And the knowledge is the wealth. And so could you talk about that? The information theory isn't some obscure thing. Yeah. It is we compound knowledge over time, and it makes life better and better.
Yeah. Well, the key themes of this book is wealth is knowledge. The Neanderthal in his cave, as Thomas Sowell pointed out in 1971, had all the physical, material resources we have today. The difference between our age and the Stone Age is entirely the accumulation of knowledge. And how do you accumulate knowledge? It's by a process of learning. And one of the absolutely central propositions of information theory, but of all business consultancies, beginning with the Boston Consulting Group and Bain and Company and McKinsey and Company and all these business consultancies operate on the learning curve. And the learning curve states that with every doubling of total units sold, costs drop between 20 and 30%. In other words, the natural progress of costs is to drop. Mm-hmm. Costs and prices should be dropping all the time. The idea that the natural condition of life is 2% inflation every year is completely spurious. It's a self-interested argument that government economists make to disguise the fact that the reason our economy doesn't work is that GNP is wildly overstated for government services and wildly understated for business contributions. And it's the third proposition is money is essentially time. When you run out of money, what you're really running out of is the time to earn more money. Money is essentially time. And William Nordhaus of Yale, the Yale Nobel laureate, developed time prices as a way to unify all economics across time and space. Through history and around the world, the number of minutes and hours it takes a typical worker to earn the money to buy the goods and services that sustain his life is the time price. And that time price is a universal measurement. And it falsifies almost all the government data. Is just completely wrong. If you measure by time, which is a universal measuring stick, rather than by all the subjective judgments of the consumer price index, the GDP deflator,
Well,
the
you know,
consumer price
told us-
index minus food and fuel.
I remember the story you told last time, I don't think it was on the show. We were just talking, and you talked about Peter Drucker. And you went to a conference for Peter Drucker. He was the famous management theorist and wrote Effective Executive, and he became a Bible for a lot of young guys like me who wanted to learn how to be a manager. You know, you read Peter Drucker. He was very brilliant. Yeah. And what did he say about CFOs and the accountants? Do you remember that story? That he was sitting up there, he was giving a talk, I think, at one of your conferences.
Oh, right. This is one of his.
The point is, all these people are putting numbers on things, maybe missing what's really going on.
It was a great moment. Peter Drucker was in his 90s. He was really deteriorating, and they carted it up on stage for a Forbes conference in Seattle. And Rich Karlgaard, and he they came out to he was in the front in this big chair, and then his head just fell directly backwards, and everybody gasped. They thought he was, I was shocked. Everybody was speechless. We thought we were observing mortality and work, but he proved immortal. He then fell forward and pointed out his finger to the audience and said, "I have only one thing to tell you today, and that is no one in your company knows less about your business than your CFO."
The chief financial officer.
Yeah, that's right, chief. And everybody gasped. But he was really saying that business is not about the statistics. It's about real things.
Well, the thing about all the statistics is they measure what is.
Yeah.
I mean, then they try to do it, and it's always backward looking.
Yeah.
And it never measures what could be. And, you know, we're dealing with all these dire forecasts about the environment, and and the Chinese and the rest of the Asians seem to have a habit of shoving all of their plastics into the river, which goes into the ocean, and we've got accumulating an island the size of Manhattan in the middle of the Pacific.
It's the size of Texas.
Okay, size of Texas, and it's filled with the flotsam and jetsam of all the plastic and other waste that they put out there. Well, one reaction would be, okay, we got to shut everything down.
Yeah.
And we've got to do something about this thing. And, the way the typical environmentalist thinks about it is, well, this is caused by fossil fuels somehow. And so if we don't want plastics, we're going to have to shut down fossil fuels. And that gasoline you're going to pump, well, we wouldn't have it. But there's another way to think about that field of plastics the size of Texas. It's an incredible raw material. And you write about that in your chapter on the carbon economy?
On the new carbon economy.
So what do we do with this?
One of the great scientists in the world and most creative is Jim Tour of Rice University, who took over...
T-O-U-R?
T-O-U-R, James Tour of Rice University. A great man. He took over the laboratory run by Richard Smalley, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering buckyballs and various inventions in carbon nanotubes. And Tor, in the last 3 or 4 years, has developed a way to convert any plastic carbon waste, including raw garbage, into perfect ribbons of turbostratic graphene. And graphene is the most extraordinary development in the last 30 years. Since the outbreak of the silicon economy, there's been no major breakthrough comparable to the discovery of graphene. It won the Nobel Prize for two Gaiman Novoselov in 2011. It caused huge hype. It's 200 times stronger than steel. It's the most thermally conductive substance ever discovered in the universe, as far as we know. It's harder than diamonds, and yet it can bend like rubber without breaking. It transmits signals so accurately that you insert it into a spinal cord, and the signals are propagated so perfectly that the spinal cord refuses. You can see that on YouTube if you want, with a mouse.
So this was an element that was invented or discovered?
It was discovered. It's a single layer of carbon atoms.
But we didn't know anything about this 10 years ago. This was not part of human knowledge.
We actually do use it all the time when we write with a lead pencil. We're actually, if the lines are light enough, they are essentially many-layer graphene. Okay. But we're about to move into a graphene age because Jim Tor and his student from Vietnam invented something called flash joule heating, which makes it possible to produce graphene by the ton from any carbon waste, including
so, for example, that
island in the Pacific suddenly becomes a gold mine. It's a wonderful resource of wealth because it can produce graphene, which is currently worth some $200,000 a ton. And single-layer graphene is produced by all sorts of exotic techniques like chemical vapor deposition that produces milligrams for megadollars. And this you can convert garbage to graphene. And graphene is the new age is going to be founded on the proliferation of graphene applications. Since Tor made this invention, there are about 18 companies have emerged to pursue it in Israel.
You predicted the internet in which year?
What?
So you predicted the internet in which year? 79, before Al Gore invented it?
I predicted.
Al Gore heard him.
My great speech was to Microsoft in 89, 90, in which I told them that the computer of the future would be as portable as your watch, as personal as your wallet. It would recognize speech. It would navigate streets. It would collect your news and your mail. It just might not do Windows, but it would open doors to the future.
Bill Gates didn't like that.
Bill Gates didn't like it, but 2 years later he gave his. I've argued with Bill Gates about this.
Yeah.
And 2 years later he gave his internet, or 3 maybe, he gave his internet speech where internet would be in everything at Microsoft. But that was a good moment.
I'm just pointing it out in case you want to go call your broker, that when George talks about what's going to happen, it very often does happen.
Well, so how does this square? So this is an optimistic assessment, thank goodness, and we should be optimistic.
This shows about the upside of everything that's going on. We got enough
which
gloom.
Is a wonderful thing. I mean,
yeah.
The people who complain, go look at the 20th century. But you also make the point in the book that markets have given way to a new generation of government rules, best defined as emergency socialism. That's your negative side of it. I was hoping you could comment on that.
Emergency socialism is the term for what we did with the lockdown.
Yes, and you note that in the book. Where this is crucial to me is you're one of the few people I know, and thank goodness you're one of the people saying it, that one of the authors, one of the instigators of this emergency socialism was no less than Milton Friedman in concert with Richard Nixon.
He did.
What he did to money was disastrous.
Yeah.
And so, again, how does the optimism square with some of the emergency socialism and what these clowns have done to money?
Well, as your book
Wait,
points
hold
out,
on, George. I'm taking my 12-minute break here at 20 minutes because I'm hanging on every word. So this is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with the great George Gilder and the equally great John Tamny, and we're talking about the information theory of economics and everything that leads to, and how it's really a pretty bright future if we think about it that way. So, George, I'm sorry. Do you need to rephrase your question? Did I?
You know it.
Okay, all right.
Emergency monetarism was launched with Richard Nixon under the counsel of Milton Friedman way back in 1971 when he removed the world economy permanently from the gold standard, with Milton's enthusiastic endorsement and prediction that if we removed gold from the dollar, the price of gold would plummet. Mm-hmm. And this really, Milton Friedman thought the dollar was propping up the price of gold rather than the price of gold propping up the dollar. Now, this wouldn't be important except that Milton Friedman was one of the greatest economists of the 20th century. He was and free to choose, and all his books are brilliant, and we continue to live by them among libertarians. But he got his Nobel Prize for his worst idea.
Absolutely.
Which is usually true. This is my rule. People get the Nobel Prize for their worst idea. William Nordhaus pretty much invented time prices.
Can I give you an exception to that? Paul Krugman, who got a Nobel Prize for his only good idea.
Very true.
Yes. But it was sort of a truism, wasn't it? That geography has an effect on economics. I mean,
yes.
but
anyway, that's right. Yeah.
But anyway, that's but Milton really didn't understand money, and it was a tragic error for which he got his Nobel Prize.
Well, he wrote a book called The Monetary History of America, right?
Yeah, right.
Disaster.
He was the world's leading expert on money at the time Nixon made that decision. So you really have to blame Milton more than Nixon.
It's staggering how much monetary theory, left to right, is governed by this absurd notion that the money that only has a purpose insofar as it facilitates the exchange of goods and services has to be planned by central planners. It's the equivalent of saying we've got a centrally planned production, yet Milton Friedman that's been his gift to economics, and it's perverted the discussion ever since.
It's really sad. And we're in the middle of it now with, just central banks have become just ways to steal from the future, to reward your cronies and constituents in the present. This is the function of money. And this is why your insight that the cryptocurrency, the perfect cryptocurrency, has not yet been contrived. But I believe that from the cryptocurrency movement will emerge a global monetary system that is based ultimately on time, which is what remains scarce when everything else is abundant. We're in an economy of abundance, as time prices show, and as the great book Superabundance, which I explain and I introduced by Marion Tupy and Gail Pooley.
They've written a couple chapters in your book.
Yeah.
So the money, the cryptocurrency, I've got a couple of guys, our place out in Virginia. They're obsessed with Bitcoin. Can we put Bitcoin in a context where I can? I don't think Bitcoin's the end all and be all, but they keep telling me I'm wrong.
It's Netscape.
Well, in
it's the
life,
Netscape
life
of the crypto
Netscape,
revolution.
Netscape, okay.
Yeah, it's Netscape of the crypto
yeah,
revolution.
right.
It created the craze, brilliant, but it's the opposite of money.
Yeah.
It can't
Amplify it because we need to kill
Well,
this.
as let me begin this because it's something that George and I have discussed a lot. You can't have enough good money.
Yeah.
Because you can't have enough production. George is talking about abundance. The sole use of money is to move around production, which means that the only limit to, quote, so-called money supply is production. Yeah. Bitcoin is rooted in the Friedmanite notion that you've got to limit the supply of that which moves production, which means it can never be money. Everyone says its greatest aspect is that there's a limit to the number of coins. No, that's what means that it can never be money. Good
right.
money is endless.
Yeah.
Because measures are endless, and time, the way in which you measure time, it's endless. There's no.
Yeah. It's like limiting the number of rulers in order to prevent the exploitation
so the flaw in
of
Bitcoin
the environment.
is they made a finite amount of it.
Yeah.
So that's the fundamental flaw.
That's the fundamental flaw. The human imagination is not limited or finite,
Well, that's our central
really,
thesis here. Yeah.
Time has two properties. It's in the present, it's scarce, but it reaches out into an unlimited future. And so money has to have both those properties. It has to be, it will express the scarcity of immediate opportunities, but open to a future of unlimited opportunities. And money as time actually has that property. You when you run out of money, what you're really running out of is the time to earn more money. That's what money is. It's time, and in this respect, it resembles all the other measuring sticks. The Système International in Paris has a perfect kilogram, a perfect watt, a perfect ampere, a perfect lumen, all these measuring sticks all include a frequency in them, which means that they're ultimately based on the speed of light. That's what unifies all the measuring sticks that allow world trade, that allow us to produce microchips in Taiwan that work in Abu Dhabi and that can be manufactured into computers in Malaysia and combined into systems in Palo Alto. This is time is the basic measuring stick that governs our lives, and it's also the foundation of money. And that's the information theory of money is essentially time. It's tokenized time. It's time converted into a form that can sustain all the transactions of the existing economy and allow investment into the future.
This is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with George Gilder, who is explaining time, and John Tamny is going to help me explain what George just explained. I'm still a little lost in that. Bitcoin doesn't meet the test of real money because it's finite, but gold does. So, but isn't gold? You can mine more gold, but how is gold different?
Well, that's different. You can mine more gold, and
okay.
the quantity of gold steadily expands,
but it also doesn't limit money.
It nullifies capital and technology because as you mine more gold, the gold becomes more diffuse and harder to mine from more remote places. And so the effect is that the time to mine an incremental ingot of gold has hardly changed in 1,000 years. It's
The time to mine an ingot of gold.
hasn't changed. So gold is in fact a time measure, and that's why it's been so successful.
But it's also market money. It was what markets happened upon over thousands of
that's
years
true,
of
too.
trial and error. And what the markets happened upon was that every ounce of gold ever mined is still with us because there's no industrial use really to gold. And so it's like me saying, hey, Bill, after the show, I'm going to go sell 1 million shares of ExxonMobil. And you would say, well, you're not going to move the price one iota because there's 6 billion outstanding. There's 220,000 metric tons of gold in the world. So any discovery, any sale can't move this price.
Yeah.
And so gold's genius is its stability. And that's why markets happened upon it as money.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman and Richard Nixon basically said, we are going to replace the market. We will substitute the market that happened upon a stable measure for money for the PhD standard, which isn't any surprise that from that
What's PhD?
Doctors,
Oh,
guys
the
like
doctor.
Friedman.
Oh, you mean, okay.
Planning,
We get so many acronyms.
planning,
I thought you were inventing a new one.
Yeah,
oh,
literally
doctorate of. Okay.
economists.
I got that one.
Economists substituting themselves for a market decision arrived at over thousands of years. We finally found reasonable stability, which is what money is. It's just a way for us to measure the movement of real goods. And we're going to replace it with the genius of economists. So emergency socialism, it's emergency central planning. It is economists substituting their microscopic knowledge for that of thousands of years of information. And we wonder why there's, what do we call it, a crisis. We wonder why, as you point out, there's in the book, there's 7 trillion, I think you said it's up to 10 trillion
It's
in daily
approaching
currency
10
trading.
trillion.
Well, of course, the markets have decided, are trying to mitigate this disastrous infusion of planning.
So floating currencies.
Yes.
But let me, I suffer from this, George. I actually was one of those CFOs at one point. I became a CEO and developed more imagination, I hope. But I suffer from having taught accounting. And the thing I wonder about gold is we were on the gold standard until when, 1935?
It's sort of, well, we were really to 1971.
Okay, 71 when Nixon did it, but then since then the world in the volume of trade and economic activity has grown exponentially, and then in terms of fiat money, it's grown much more than that, and yet the volume of gold in the world, you now say we've got 200.
Actual growth of value has even exceeded the growth of fiat money.
Okay,
that's what time prices show. It's an amazing,
So
it's an amazing
in fact, we're
discovery.
under measuring the growth in the economy because of the way we're using currencies to. But with 220,000 tons now, how much do we have in 1971?
170 tons.
It would have been
So
probably
it didn't go up. It went up.
It goes
30,
up about
40%.
2% a year historically.
So if gold is going to be backing money, but we've got this massive increase in real economic activity, how does gold back that
Gold
activity?
doesn't back it. Gold
is
defines
a
it.
measuring stick.
All right. By the way,
There's
I'm using my hands. I've got my George Gilder.
Through history, there hasn't been any relationship between the amount of gold and the growth of economies. I mean, during the Industrial Revolution in the United States, gold quantity, gold reserves increased by, I think it was 3 times, while total economic activity rose roughly 400 times. The gold was a measuring stick, and you could use it to multiply currency as long as the currency didn't violate the signal that the measuring stick offered. It was like a ruler. It was a gauge. And it wasn't a magic wand for central banks. It was a measuring stick for value. And that's its function. People misunderstand gold. They think money was gold. And so you need more. There isn't enough gold to be money. That's true, but gold is a measuring stick for money.
Okay.
And if as long as you didn't violate that measuring stick, you didn't start lying about the real values of what you're producing, you could have as much money as people could employ to produce goods and services. John explains that brilliantly in his book.
Well, but let's think about this through wealth as information. So in 1971, there were no currency markets. Why would there be? Money had a stable measure. Why would you trade currencies? There's no volatility to them. Have you ever thought about what we've lost in terms of information as all these brilliant minds have moved to facilitator roles, basically trading the chaos? Is it unrealistic to say that cancer would have already been cured, among other things, had we not stolen all this genius from the economy, from production?
Now, is that another way of saying that what George writes about the financialization of the massive growth?
The hypertrophy of finance.
Yeah, I mean, that's, so let's.
What have we lost?
Well, I think we've lost a lot. However, all this loss, what really has happened is that the private economy has yielded around the globe, has yielded value 1,000 times greater than is actually measured. The time prices show that that value in the private economy has been increasing between 4 and 5% for decades, and Nordhaus estimated, just focusing on one facet of value, the advance of lighting through the millennia, that that while people wrote about dark satanic mills and the dismal science of economics, an efflorescence of lighting was proceeding throughout the industrial world, and it was lighting became thousands of 100,000 times more value was created by the progress of lighting, according to the Nordhaus, than was measured by economists. So all this was private sector contributions, but the GDP pretends that the government is just really doing a great job. It's producing value right apace with the private sector, and the natural state of prices is not to drop steadily as a result of the learning curve, but instead it's supposed to drift up 2% a year. That's just an alibi for the bureaucrats who are botching the economy and losing value. They probably are net. Most of the activities are a net negative for progress, and that would be evident if you use time prices. The only things that are losing value in time prices are government services like education and recently medical care. Our lifespans are no longer increasing; they're decreasing at the moment.
Well, the more government takes over healthcare, the less progress we see.
Yeah.
Well, you just stated the official position of this show. Government produces no value. In fact, it's negative.
I mean, some governments, you do need a low entropy carrier that's a predictable carrier of constitutional law and property rights and moral codes in order to bear high entropy, unexpected creations. Human creativity always comes as a surprise to us, as Albert Hirschman of Princeton wrote. If he studied all the UN and World Bank economic projects all around the globe and found none worked according to their projects and agendas. But every so often, there would be an entrepreneurial surprise. Some entrepreneur would take some of the money and so
you talk about
he said,
that.
I'll just complete this. He said, creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it, and economic planning would work.
Well, and so you talk about that a lot in the book, and I think it's Vinton Cerf. He would get together with his buddies at Caltech, and they wouldn't report the experiments that yielded the obvious. They would report their failures Carver mead. And so the question then, and you so crucially say that all this government spending on global warming and stuff it's not producing real knowledge, which we know as wealth. I ask this because supply-siders for years have said to me, John, don't talk about government spending. Don't you know, Jude Wanniski said, don't talk about government spending.
Why did they say don't talk about government spending?
They would say because we can either be Santa Claus or we can be the Grinch. And I would say, no. Government spending is the crushing of knowledge. It's basically this pursuit of the opposite of knowledge. Where are you on this? You discredit incentive economics here, which obviously you and I were talking. Do you agree that government spending is arguably the biggest tax on progress of all, precisely because it robs us of the leaps that you think are so important?
Yeah, it does. It does. However, what time prices have shown is that it moves around the world. You know, the entrepreneurial creativity moves to the areas where it's most welcomed and leaves the areas where it's condemned. And the result is that economic growth has been far faster than anybody has estimated, measured by the amount of time that a typical worker has to spend to get all the goods and services.
Let me bring it back down to my CFO level.
All right.
We say that economic growth, GDP, was 3%. You're saying that's nonsense, that doesn't even come close to showing what happened. If you take the quality of the goods and services that are being made, that's not being captured in the accounting numbers. And its value is much greater than the numbers would say. Is that am I getting?
That's right. That's right. That the real measure is the time it takes to earn the money to purchase. In Superabundance, the book by Tupy and Pooley, they measure the time that it takes to produce the 50 key commodities. There are everything from oil to salmon to copper to the 50 bread. And they discovered that since 1980, the price of all these 50 commodities and the amount of time that you got to work to get a unit has dropped 75%.
But that's almost...
And while world population has increased 75%. And
doesn't that understate it? I mean, this is a supercomputer that sits in my pocket. What's the time price of this? This would have cost what? Your colleague Brett Swanson says this would have cost $15 million not too long ago. The time price of this that you can get for next to nothing.
And a lot of it would,
So we're zeroing in on what time price means, because I want to understand. So the time price is the time it takes
to work to get.
But also the inventions that went into that device you just held up. I mean,
that's knowledge. Increasing knowledge increases wealth. That's what's really increasing.
So who benefits from selling the notion that everything is really worse than it really actually is? And I can answer my question.
Booksellers.
You've got well, booksellers. That's sort of the
Yeah,
point. The
yeah.
media benefits from selling us bad news, whether you're on the left or the right. If it's on the right, the other side is terrible. And the political class also benefits from the sort of the same thing: is that things are terrible, and I'm going to take care of you. And they couldn't do well if they said, "Look, everything's fine. Just relax. We're going to."
We don't need any new programs.
We don't need any new programs.
We don't need any more bureaucrats.
If we just look at what always naturally happens, there's some guy that's going to invent something to deal with that Texas-sized chunk of plastic in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah. Turn it into a resource.
So we could all just relax and enjoy our life.
But flash
I don't know why you're doing this.
Flash fuel heating not only converts garbage into a valuable resource, perhaps the most valuable resource, but it also yields as a side effect pure hydrogen. So I don't think we actually need hydrogen fuel for a lot of things, and they can also get hydrogen from deep in the earth now. There are all sorts of sources of hydrogen. But still, this means that garbage is being transformed into two enormously valuable substances. Graphene worth between $100,000 and $200,000 a ton, and hydrogen, which is regarded to be a clean fuel. It sheds only water when it's used as a fuel. So it's just that the possibilities of human creativity are essentially infinite, and they always come as a surprise to us. And Claude Shannon, really the founder of information theory, was Claude Shannon in 1948, and he defined information as essentially surprise, as unexpected bits. And if everything I say today you already know, no information is being transmitted. And
I don't think you're saying a lot today that I already
unexpected knowledge, not predetermined knowledge or material random factors fluctuating through time. It's unexpected knowledge.
So I want to go so many places with this. So if it's the economic theory of information versus the politics of fear.
That's right. I think that's right. That's a very...
And we're dominated by the politics of fear.
Yeah.
What did the late Fred Thompson, they asked him, why didn't you run for president in 2000? And he said, I just didn't want to go around the country telling people how bad they had it. And I thought it was a brilliant
That's a
response.
really interesting...
Thank goodness, finally someone pointed the obvious out.
Yeah.
That these guys are running, to your point, on how awful it is, and let me show you how I'm going to fix it. Have they lost their minds?
Yeah.
Have they looked around the world? What everyone in the world would give anything to have.
Well, but they know how
problems.
to win elections.
Yeah, no, it's
I mean, this
good
is
politics.
what we're seeing with social media. I mean, that's what you get driven down this rabbit hole of fear and concern.
Yeah.
Well, I think get us out of here, John. We're doing something really. But we've got demons that are purported to be so terrible and will rearrange the whole world economy, like the CO2 scare.
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be one of the biggest.
Aren't we a rich world that we can worry about something so not important?
Well, let's all guess. I mean, George and I were talking about this. I mean, people don't understand what an infinitesimal amount of the atmosphere that CO2 really is.
0.004%. And that's not enough, according to the real great scientists of the era. People like Freeman Dyson, a great physicist, who studied CO2 for decades, Will Happer, who's head of physics at Princeton, who was briefly Trump's science advisor, got Trump to withdraw from the Paris climate treaty. That was a brilliant move, a brilliant and bold move that Trump did. And that's Will Happer. Richard Lindzen, who was head of atmospheric physics at MIT, and Stephen Koonin, who was provost and physics professor at Caltech, and Obama's chief science advisor. They all agree that there's no evidence that there's any kind of CO2 crisis. Many of the really most brilliant Nobel quality scientists actually believe that the big threat is not enough CO2. CO2 is what makes the planet green. And Howard Hayden, who's a brilliant physicist from University of Connecticut, has shown that that all the impact of CO2 on warming has already happened. There's just almost no further room, no matter how much CO2 we emit, there will be very little impact. And you know, actually temperatures today are significantly lower, actually, than what's called the medieval climate optimum. The temperatures are lower today than they were in the 1930s when the Dust Bowl occurred. It's a
if you look at the chart, the spike in temperature in the 30s was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that had nothing to do with what they're.
Yeah. But it wasn't.
But you couldn't have talked about it in the 30s.
Well, but we're hitting on something here about this thing is really being driven by agendas that the political class.
Everyone's got a crisis.
Yeah.
The right talked today about, well, we're not having enough babies. And, that's going to drive disaster in this country. Have they lost their minds? A baby being born today is worth thousands of babies born 50 years ago in terms of productivity. And so imagine John Kerry talking about how
Well,
we're
you're
running.
not saying we shouldn't have more babies.
I'm saying people should do what they want
Okay.
what they want to do, but John Kerry talking about global warming. Imagine if he talked about it in
global warming.
1935,
George,
after you've had World War I, and you've had the Russian Revolution and the slaughter of the Armenians, and you had the leaving of monetary stability, and then you had Hitler, and then you had World War II and the Holocaust and the spread of communism around the world. We're talking about global warming? Boy, we must be a rich society, but also one that has nothing to worry about. Because the things that the right and left worry about, that they say crisis, are microscopic to what happened in the 20th century. Yeah. It's a bullish signal that a clown like Kerry is going around the world saying this.
Brilliant, John. That's a good conclusion. That's a climax. John really.
Okay, we are gonna. I got some. You have to buy this book. It's Life After Capitalism, and just some of the chapters. Is money a commodity? We'll talk a little bit about that. Bitcoin capitalism, the myth of the economic man, and how we understand incentives could be all wrong. The carbon age. We're getting at something in this that I think is essential, though. That if you really look at what people do when left free to live and innovate, they're creating wealth decade after decade after decade. Mm-hmm. And if we just leave people alone, it might be okay. But there'd be no job for the John Kerry. Mm-hmm. George, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Well, I think this is a wonderful moment of opportunity in the world. The transition into the graphene economy, which will transform every industry and meet the crucial heat crisis that is bringing Moore's Law to a close in the silicon domain. Now we have an element, graphene, that is 1,000 times more heat conductive than silicon, and it's going to transform electronics, communications, medicine. It really is a wonderful moment of global opportunity that we're dissipating in our preoccupation with these phony crises of heat, of weather rather than the thermal problems of the AI data centers. They are all mostly dominated. They're giant refrigerators, really, all these data centers that produce our AI. And
well, that's what they're supposedly trying to solve the problem of heat. I mean, the more the internet expands, the more artificial intelligence expands, you got to cool all these machines down, and you can't afford to do that.
But you can do it with graphene and with a distributed artificial intelligence.
Oh, to
the
have
world
these problems.
is back in the 1960s when IBM thought that 14 giant mainframes could fulfill all the needs for computation of the global economy. This is in the 1960s. Now we got 14 vast data centers by glaciers and dominated by cooling problems, and they're supposed to produce a unitary singularity AI, as if there's just one truth that AI can propagate and be controlled by a few mainframes. And AI is going to be in everyone's pocket. AI is going to be a wonderful new phase of the computer revolution, but it has nothing to do with becoming conscious or competing with human minds. That's just another fake crisis that's being used to have government nationalize these few mainframe data centers that now do all the AI for Google and Facebook and Microsoft. A few big companies dominate AI, and AI is going to be great if you just don't nationalize it.
So this has been the Bill Walton Show with the majestic George Gilder, and I need an adjective for you, John Tamny. Thank you for the
Beautiful
summary.
or something.
And I hope you enjoyed this dose of positive reality. And this is not optimism. I mean, if you just look around at the world in the last 250 years, the kind of thing that George and John have been talking about, and I'm struggling to understand some of it, but it's also real, and that all these good things that are happening will happen if we just let them happen, and if we keep government out of it. And it's not just, it's the idea that there's some magical people in an office that can protect us from all these things is just all wrong. So I don't know whether this is a proper close for a show, but anyway, thanks for joining. We're on all the platforms. You know where to find us. Please send us your comments. We take them into consideration. I know you're going to want George and John back to continue the conversation because we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. Anyway, thanks for joining. Oh, by the way, subscribe to the show. Give us a 5-star review. And Maureen, what else am I supposed to say? Oh yeah, we're going to be starting a new segment here called Bill Walton Live. It's called Inside Backstage, and we're going to be bringing people on live on Facebook or YouTube. I'm sorry, I'm in my tech. What platform are we going to be on? We're going to be on Zoom, and we're going to have a dialogue with you and some other guests, and just talk in real time about these questions, and hopefully have some answers. So, thanks for joining, George, John.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guests on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.